In the urgent sales pitch to make the tax code simpler, does President Trump need to take a cue from the Gipper? Here's our president now.
We're going to cut taxes for the middle class, make the tax code simpler and more fair for everyday Americans, and we are going to bring back the jobs and wealth that have left our country, and most people thought left our country for good.
And now, here is the great communicator. Take a listen.
I'll start by answering one question on your minds. Will our proposal help you? You bet it will. How would the proposal work? The present tax system has 14 different brackets of tax rates ranging from 11 to 50%. We would take a giant step toward an ideal system by replacing all that with a simple 3-bracket system.
See the difference? Well, hi, everybody. I'm David Aslan. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus to find out more with Steve Forbes, Rich Karlgaard, Mike Gozanian, Elizabeth McDonald, John Tamny, and Bruce Jackson. Steve, is it possible for President Trump to go the Reagan way?
Absolutely, and he should do it just before Congress votes on it, which is what Reagan did it back in 1981. Have the details there so he knows what to present to the American people. And he doesn't need a lot of graphs, just one little thing in the background showing a typical American family is going to keep $300, $400, $500 extra a month and say this is your pay raise if Congress passes it. Then he does his rallies, which adds fuel to those flames. That's how you get something through Congress. Turn up public opinion's heat.
John, could President Trump do that?
I don't think he can. We have to remember that Reagan spent years articulating his message. I would add that Reagan also had a good plan to articulate, which makes it much easier to sell. As Trump himself has said, his tax plan does not help people like him. Well, last I checked, the rich pay the majority of the taxes. If we're not cutting taxes on the rich, that means we're not cutting taxes. How do you sell that?
Well, Rich, there is one similarity, which is a simplification program. We saw President Reagan having that list. Back then, there were 11 different tax brackets. He brought them down to 3. Now, President Trump is suggesting that our 7 brackets on the left be converted to 3. So there is a similarity here.
Somewhat. You know, if Donald Trump really wanted this to happen in a big way, he could make it happen. But it's not clear to me that he really wants it to happen or that it's his top priority, because he's so easily distracted picking on Mark Zuckerberg or NFL players. If he would do that, that separates him from Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan would not have allowed himself to be distracted in the way Donald Trump is distracted.
Well, Bruce, I don't think you'd like either Reagan or Trump in this regard, but do you think it's possible for President Trump to mimic what Reagan did?
Well, I wouldn't be so sure about that. I see pictures of Reagan and look at what we got now, and actually it does make me miss him a little bit. But listen, Trump gets so distracted, as Rich was saying. I mean, over the weekend, you know, we had the 3rd try on Obamacare appeal, and he's tweeting about the NFL. And listen, he could do some rallies, but I don't think he has ability to do any rallies outside of Indiana and Alabama. And so he's got to broaden he's got to be a president for the whole country.
Well, he has been doing rallies, Mike, and the point is that what Ronald Reagan did, of course, it was a different time. I understand there were only 3 networks back then, for example. Now we have gazillion of them. But Trump, we played a clip at the front comparing Trump's speech with Reagan's speech. Maybe that wasn't fair, because there are certain times when Trump does speak clearly and simply about what he wants to do. Let's play a clip of him.
I'm doing the right thing, and it's not good for me, believe me. But what is good for me, not only as president and legacy, what is good for me is if everything takes off like a rocket ship, like it should have for 20 years.
So, Mike, a rising tide lifts all boats. That's the message he's making there.
Trump's problem in getting tax reform, David, hasn't been that he hasn't been out there getting the message across. He has. And most people in this country are for tax reform. His policy would be pro-growth, just like most people don't want Obamacare and people were for supporting getting rid of Obamacare with something different. It's not Trump. The problem is other Republicans in leadership haven't been supporting Trump's policies. That's been the main problem. He couldn't get the votes for getting rid of Obamacare, and he hasn't gotten a lot of Republican support for tax reform. This program will help people like Trump, because when you cut corporate taxes and you cut the top marginal rates, everybody benefits.
All right. Well, that's a good point, Emac, that Mike makes, is that it's not just Donald Trump. I mean, there's the whole infrastructure that has to vote on it, Congress, et cetera. Peggy Noonan wrote to this point in the Wall Street Journal this weekend. She said, Paul Ryan compared this moment to 1986 when Ronald Reagan won tax reform. But that was another world, a broadly popular president. Both parties were strong, each working, however reluctantly, with the other.
Yeah, you're right. And back during the Reagan era, you had Democrats who were on board with the Reagan tax cuts. It was co-sponsored by Dan Rostenkowski. Even liberal Ted Kennedy was for it. Dick Kephart, Bill Bradley, they worked on it. Even though Howard Baker, Senate Majority Leader, said this is Reaganomics, this is a riverboat gamble, I guess that makes Obamacare the Titanic gamble. Basically, what we had back then was a real bipartisan push. Today, we've got the Democrats acting like the Walter Mondales of back then and talking about tax hikes. And the Democrat Party is playing hardball. Mike Ozanian is right. They are out there with misleading statements, whereas the Republicans are too nice. The Republicans need to play hardball.
Well, nobody's accused Donald Trump of being too nice before, but he has another
I'm talking
thing.
about Mitch McConnell.
I get you. But he has another thing in his favor, which is Mike Pence, his vice president. Mike Pence gets it. He understands tax reform, and he knows how to sell it, right?
He does indeed. And one of the things Republicans got to do in Congress is get away from those words tax reform. What people want are big tax cuts. Also, don't fall in the trap of class warfare. Everyone wants to know, is it going to help me, my family? If you show that's true, they don't care if Bill Gates does well. They want to know, am I doing well? Am I got more prospects for the future? Is the economy really humming again? If the economy does well, all of those Democrat criticisms are forgotten and the Republicans triumph.
So, John, aren't any tax cuts good? And if Trump just said, forgot about the reform word and just said, I'm for tax cuts, wouldn't that satisfy people like you?
It would satisfy me if they were right. I mean, I'm hearing that the Democrats are not helping out. Well, the Democrats are doing what they always do. They claim the tax cuts help the rich. Well, for once, why don't Republicans actually design a tax cut that aids the rich? That is how you get economic growth, matching capital with talent. The rich have all the capital, yet Republicans keep trying to placate. Even Trump saying, this won't help me. If it doesn't help Trump, it doesn't help the nation.
Well, Rich, let's go to you. And about that word rich, I mean, the fact is there's nothing wrong with being rich. Everybody wants to be rich. People come here to get rich. I mean, why is it that Republicans are now afraid of using that word?
I don't know. I mean, that is a great mystery of our time. It's still in the hands of Donald Trump, though. I mean, he's got to put the persuasive powers of the presidency to work on this, to concentrate on this, really nothing else. Well, maybe North Korea, but really nothing else until he gets it done.
Emac, again, the word rich, I don't see any problem with wanting to be rich, do you?
People do not prosper at the expense of the poor. Oprah Winfrey, Steve Jobs, Howard Schultz, Larry Ellison, they were all poor and they moved up.
And Oprah Winfrey, by the way, may be the Democratic contender that Donald Trump goes up against next time.
Yeah, that's why the Republicans got to stop using Democrat language and use the language of growth like Ronald Reagan did. Everyone gets a tax cut. Consumers, middle class, people striving, rich. That's how you get investment. That's how you get consumer spending. Reagan had it right. Kennedy had it right. Yep. Let's go that way.
And it helps the poor, the middle class, and the rich. It's not bad if everybody gets rich. Okay, coming up next, all eyes are on what football players are going to do tomorrow. If players keep kneeling down, is it time for the NFL stadiums to give those taxpayer dollars up?
Live from America's news headquarters in Washington, good morning to you. I'm Leland Vittert. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is holding high-level meetings in China. On the agenda, the nuclear showdown with North Korea and laying the groundwork for President Trump's upcoming visit to China in November. Tillerson meeting with China's foreign minister along with their president. The White House, meantime, cracking down on the use of private planes by top officials. This following the resignation of Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price over his use of private planes for government business. In a memo to federal agencies, the White House budget director says most air travel must be approved in advance by the White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly. A lot more on the fallout from this at the top of the hour. Jillian Turner and I will be with you. I'm Leland Vittert. Now back to Forbes on Fox.
So, are you ready for some more football protests? Everybody stood at the national anthem at Thursday night's Packers-Bears game. That was good, but that could all change tomorrow. Athletes, activists, and viewers still sparring over players taking a knee at NFL games this week. And might you say, since taxpayers foot the bill for most NFL stadiums, they should have the last word on what goes down in those stadiums, right?
David, they're already having the last word by not watching as much NFL on television. Ratings were down 8% last year when this all started. They're down 11% this year on average from last year. Wall Street's talking about already $200 million in givebacks. In other words, free advertising that the broadcasters of NFL games are going to have to give back to the advertisers.
Wow. EMAC, it is true. There's a lot of federal money and state and local. Federal money is $3.2 billion. It's gone to sports stadiums since 2000. State and locals, a lot more than that. $6 to $6.7 billion. That's a lot of cash.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, and the taxpayers are on the hook for defunct stadiums if fans don't show up. The only place I think this is justified is in Green Bay, where the town owns the Green Bay Packers. I think there should be common sense here. I mean, yes, take a knee in the end zone after a football game, not for the flag. The flag is a symbol of freedom, not oppression.
But, Steve, should the taxpayers have the final say? Because a lot of their money goes into these stadiums.
Yeah, there's no reason why, David, you can have those bonds be tax payable. If a municipality or county or state wants to do it, go ahead. It's their money. But don't have taxpayers around the country foot the bill. And the other thing is antitrust. They have an antitrust exemption. David, there's no other industry in the world, in this country, where 32 companies can get together and put payroll caps and stuff like that. Hold that over their heads, and I think they'll start to say, oh, we'll change our ways.
Well, you know, they're always saying that the stadiums are good for the community, John Tammy, that they deserve the taxpayer money that they get because in the end, the communities get more money. What say you?
Oh, that's ridiculous. Yeah. Stadiums are the opposite of economically stimulative. They're the equivalent of a Fed helicopter drop of money. The money would drop in and then be dispersed elsewhere. But if cities and states want to be ridiculous and do that which does nothing for the economy, they should be allowed to. At the notion of federal taxpayer help, not a chance.
And, Bruce, it really is insult to injury, then, if they're taking a knee, something that the audience who's paid for these stadiums doesn't like.
Well, I don't know that. I think when the president called these guys SOBs, I think people were like, okay, that's a little over the top, and he just inflamed the situation. But I think these decisions should be made locally. And I might add, I live 6 blocks from Wrigley Field, and my property taxes are going up again. So,
well, Sabrina, I'm sure some of your money inside the Beltway, living in Washington, D.C., you get both federal and local money going to these stadiums.
Yeah, no, it's terrible, David. We also get the traffic associated with this, so I think that we get a double whammy. Look, the NFL is worth $14 billion, and our team here, the Redskins, is worth $3 billion. It's number 8 on the Forbes top 50 list of sports teams. The idea that we would be giving them federal taxpayers subsidies is just the idea that we're pouring gravy on the Thanksgiving table. It's horrifying to me.
And, Mike, you went through a litany of all the money that the NFL could lose as a result from advertising, from a whole lot of things if these protests go on. Thursday night, we got to remind viewers, Thursday night, everybody stood up. They linked arms, but they stood during the national anthem. Do you think the NFL's getting a message?
I do, and in fact, so are the other leagues, David. The commissioner of the NBA came out this past week and said NBA players will be required to stand during the national anthem. Don't think that the NBA or the other sports aren't watching what's going on in the NFL.
EMAC?
I think Mike is absolutely right. And by the way, the NFL has a federal antitrust exemption, and the head office, the headquarters, or the umbrella organization is a nonprofit. Yeah, I agree with Mike.
Steve?
And in terms of referendums, how about requiring that municipalities have a chance to vote whether they want to pay tax money for those stadiums? In a lot of areas, there will be a vote, no vote.
Now, there's a novel idea, right?
Democracy.
Yeah, exactly. The Cash It In gang getting ready to roll at the bottom of the hour. Liz Clayman, what do you got?
Hi, David. Forget the naysayers and the cheerleaders. Are the markets and the economy predicting that this tax cut package will pass? Plus, a pay-to-play scandal rocking the college basketball world. Now, a new game plan that could keep coaches out of trouble and players cashing in. We'll see you at the bottom of the hour, David.
Okay, Liz, thanks. We'll be watching. But up here first, more than a year after a report that former Facebook employees admitted to suppressing conservative news on their trending topics section, the president this week still says Facebook has a bias, calling the site anti-Trump. Is he right or is he wrong? The president slamming Facebook this week, accusing the social media site as always having been, quote, anti-Trump. Now, Facebook's CEO hit back at the claims of bias, saying, and I quote, Trump says Facebook is against him. Liberals say we help Trump. Both sides are upset about ideas and content they don't like. That's what running a platform for all ideas looks like. Now, Steve, almost half of U.S. Facebook users say they get their news from Facebook, so this is very serious stuff. Who's got it right?
Sadly, David, conservatives are getting the shaft from Facebook. You see it on sites, the conservative websites, the postings on Facebook, very difficult to do. They've been cracking down on it. This is not extreme stuff. This is good conservative stuff. So there is bias in there, and Zuckerberg ought to address it because he and these other big tech companies are going to face more and more political pressures as the bigger they get. So heed the cries of conservatives.
Bruce, here's what the cry from President Trump is, and I'm quoting a tweet. Facebook was always anti-Trump. The networks were always anti-Trump. Hence, fake news, New York Times apologized, and Washington Post were anti-Trump. Collusion? Question mark. What say you?
Oh, my goodness. I don't know where to begin here. He's such a whiner. He is such a I need a breath here. He's such a whiner. I mean, he had passes, and they showed all of his rallies during the campaign. He's President of the United States. Come on, just be president.
But, Rich, it is a fact that former Facebook workers said that they were routinely suppressing conservative news. I mean, that came out about a year ago.
Hey, Facebook is based in the San Francisco Bay Area. What else would you expect? But I think it's wrong for the president to criticize them by name. Look, we conservatives certainly didn't like it when President Obama bashed private jets, which was devastating to the economy of Wichita, Kansas. So I think we need to be consistent here. Presidents should not attack privately run companies.
Sabrina, what say you?
Yeah, and I actually really don't care if they're biased one way or the other. I don't pay for Facebook. They are not, in my mind, a news outlet. They are a social platform, and I think that we need to stop thinking of them as such a behemoth that we
right.
Getting so caught up in this. The fact is, none of us are actually paying them a cent. They can do whatever they want.
Well, that's a good point. And, John, I'd save my outrage for NPR, which we are paying a part of, and they seem to, in my mind, to be even more biased than Facebook.
Yes, Sabrina's absolutely right. Mark Zuckerberg should tell Donald Trump it's none of his business what he does with his private business. And I would just add, though, I love when a president is so distracted by the inconsequential. Pray he does this all the time.
You just don't want him to do anything, right?
Yes,
that's the point.
right.
But, Emac, 45% of Americans get their news from Facebook. There is a kind of a public trust now that Facebook has, right?
No, I don't. I agree with Sabrina and Rich. They're a private company. They can get your news elsewhere. I don't think the president should attack Facebook like this in this manner. But I think Facebook needs to own up and fess up that it is a media shop.
Steve?
Yeah, and the fact is, even though the law says one thing, if you get big and people feel that you're not treating everyone fairly, AT&T in the old days before the 1980s went out of its way to make sure everyone was taken care of. Facebook should follow that example or they're going to suffer political consequences. Just a fact of life.
Rich, we only have about 20 seconds. Is that culture out in Silicon Valley ever going to change?
It's one that the East Coast doesn't understand. The most powerful capitalists, the people who work the hardest in the country are out here, but they have different social views than conservatives do.
All right. Thanks, gang. Coming up, the stocks that could take off when taxes go down. Our informers are next.
Yes, the economy is growing, but are these past presidents showing us how it could really be booming? Forget the 3% growth we're seeing now. How about 5, 6, and even 7% growth we saw back then? Can this Republican tax plan do it? Hi, everybody. Welcome to Cashin' In. I'm Liz Clayman. Here with us this week, Rachel Campos-Duffy, Jerry Willis, Juan Williams, and Steve Cortez. Welcome, everybody. Steve, I'll start with you. You say history shows how tax cuts do boost the economy. Give us some evidence.
No, absolutely. And by the way, most people, when they talk history here and tax cuts, they go straight to Ronald Reagan, which, of course, is a great case. I'd like to go further back to John F. Kennedy. My Irish grandmother on my mother's side, she had a picture of JFK on her wall. I think that's mainly because he was Irish and Catholic and handsome. But I would put a picture of him on the wall because he was a tax cutter. And a lot of people don't know that. He was really the last Democrat who really believed in cutting taxes. And what happened, sadly, he didn't live to see a lot of this, but what happened as a result is the economy soared in the mid to late 60s, as did the stock market. So JFK proves that when we cut taxes, when we incentivize people, put money in their pockets, empower them, great things happen and prosperity is lifted for all, particularly the middle class.
And let's not forget, Reagan was Irish and handsome, too. Juan Williams,
Sure.
Where do you stand on this?
Well, I don't think there's any question. I think the evidence is, you can see it right there in the chart. But I will say this in response to Steve, that, of course, you were cutting from a much higher level of taxation than we have today. And even as we consider it high taxation at 39% for an individual, people would say, my God, that was 70%. So that's a big difference. But here's the thing. The package that's on the table right now, does it put money in the middle class man and woman's pocket? And I think that's the problem Democrats are going to have. Everyone on this panel is going to say, oh, Democrats always say this is going to benefit the rich. But actually, this package does benefit the rich. And I think Democrats are going to have to push against President Trump and say, you got to do less for the super rich and more for the average man and woman. Because right now, the polls show Americans don't like tax cuts for corporations or the rich. They want it for small business and for middle-class individuals.
But in a way, Jerry, this one gives it to all sides,
Right.
and it's a matter of closing loopholes that will then give the middle class an upper hand or at least an advantage.
Well, look, I think you're absolutely right. This is really a comprehensive tax change, and I think the real beneficiaries here are corporations that are going to be able to bring money back, not pay that huge corporate tax rate of 35%. The question is, what will they do with that money once they get it back? It's going to be interesting to see. What will they do? Will they hire people? Will they expand? Will they decide, oh, no, we're going to buy back shares, we're going to boost our dividend? I think we want more jobs.
Well, just in time, we've got a new Fox News poll that shows nearly 9 out of 10 think our massive tax system needs to be changed or completely overhauled. Rachel, is this it? I mean, will it actually pay for itself? The theory is that these tax cuts will, and we do see some evidence historically. But the question is, are we doing anything about cutting spending and cutting the deficit?
Of course, taking care of those issues would help the economy as well. But I just read an article today about lobbyists scrambling because they're seeing their loopholes going away in this new plan. I mean, that's draining the swamp. That's what makes people excited about this plan. I think it's a plan that's going to help the middle class. And I think that Donald Trump was very invested. I mean, when you heard him talking about health care, he was, but when you hear him talking about this tax plan, you know he was involved in it, and you know that he made a promise to the people that he was going to give the middle class the break that they need. Right now, you're seeing a lot of liberals opposing it. I don't think they're opposing this plan because they think it won't work. I think they're afraid it will work. And when you get 4, maybe 5 or 6% GDP, it's going to reveal a lot about the problems with the Obama big government and centralized economy take on how to run our country. This is an opportunity for the GOP to prove that their free enterprise ideas work.
Steve, let's pretend that I'm a naysayer and I say President Trump actually gets to benefit. This is what you've heard. I mean, you have heard people say this already,
right,
that with the elimination of the estate tax, then wealthy people, they still need to define the brackets, though, too. I'd love to know what they consider rich. What is that level that wealthy people will get a great deal under this if the estate tax is cut? Fight back on that to our viewers.
Sure. No, listen, I would say this. I think some wealthy people under the current plan might actually see their taxes go up, particularly if you live in a very high tax state. So if you're a law partner in Los Angeles, you're going to have problems probably with this tax code. Or if you're a Wall Street executive who lives in New York and you lose the deductibility of your state and local taxes, which, by the way, I think should happen because it's unfair that low tax states effectively subsidize high tax states. Florida and Texas shouldn't be subsidizing my state of Illinois or a high tax state like New Jersey. So some very wealthy people might actually see their taxes go up under this plan. To me, the crux, though, and the way I would sell a skeptic on this is say 70% of American taxpayers do not itemize. They take the standard deduction. This tax plan doubles the standard deduction. So that is an automatic tax cut for them and simplification. Simplification is so key. You know, to Rachel's point.
That's what our poll shows.
Yeah, the K Street cabal love complexity, right? They live in complexity, and that's where they find their utility. Unfortunately, simplification rewards regular American workers, the rest of us.
Indeed, and you'll start to see a lot of those lobbyists, Juan, start to fight like heck because their air hose is getting stepped on with this plan, is it not? And then to that end, the elimination of the elimination of the deduction of state and local taxes for, more highly taxed states is very controversial too.
Highly controversial. So imagine you're in the real estate business. Boy, the real estate lobbyists on K Street in D.C. are going nuts because if you double the standard deduction, essentially you make the household mortgage deduction less valuable and less people will take it. So they see this as a disincentive in terms of home buying in the country, and that would have tremendous ramifications. I just want to push back on you guys and say, okay, so you do away with the estate tax, you do away with the alternate minimum tax, right? You create a situation where you have pass-through, so those law firms that Steve was talking about in New York and L.A., guess what? Suddenly their partners are making more money than ever, and I think that's the way Democrats see it. And they want simplification, but they don't think you should just dump all the money in the hands of the rich. That's just more income inequality.
Jerry Willis?
I have to push back on that. Look, the pass-through that you're talking about, what's happening to small businesses right now, they look like rich people on paper because they put their profits from their company through their personal IRS filing, right? What we need to do is reduce that tax for them. Guess what? We'll hire more people. That will have a direct and immediate impact on the economy, no doubt about it.
We saw how the tax cuts worked under Reagan. We saw how both a tax cut and a tax hike under Clinton worked. Both had great growth. Let's look at the Obama administration. 8 years, of course, hit by a horrific financial crisis. You know, he literally takes over 2 months before the all-time low of the markets, at least during that period of time. Rachel, to what do you glean from something like that?
I think the Obama economy was a failure. I think that what we're seeing first of all, when Trump was elected, we already saw consumer confidence, business confidence, investment increasing. Every project that people were thinking about for 8 years under the Obama economy, they finally said, we can do it because we believe that a businessman president is going to be on our side and not vilify us. So I think that what we're seeing with this tax reform and these tax cuts is that the economy is going to go in overdrive because it's already starting to boom, and this will just push things further.
We do remind people the economy is not the same as the stock market. The stock market gained triple-digit percentages from Obama and has done extraordinarily well under Trump, but we need to remember it's not the same thing. All right, Puerto Rico in dire need of help. And private companies are answering the call. The uplifting news you may not be hearing on other channels, but you will hear. And that's next. It's being called a catastrophe of biblical proportions. And as the government rushes to prevent a humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico, it's private companies who are already succeeding by pitching in to help. Corporate America sending food, water, money, and planes to help evacuate victims. And guess what? Some of America's biggest corporations among those coming to the rescue of areas recently absolutely ravaged by natural disasters. Jerry, we always hear the bad about private businesses, but when the chips are down, they step up and do a lot of good, don't they?
They absolutely do. And you see these companies, what they're doing. The airlines, Delta, JetBlue, they're sending planes down full of food, full of supplies for these folks who have been devastated in Puerto Rico. It's so heartwarming to hear. And you know that old saying about, hey, look, when times are tough, when times are bad, that's when people really step up. That's exactly what's going on with these corporations right now. And you see Royal Caribbean, you see Carnival Lines, all these companies. What are they donating? They're donating what they have. They're giving what they can. They're giving ships. They're giving planes. There's a small New York power authority. Guess what they're doing? They're sending down 10 engineers to help. Now, that's real help for Puerto Rico that desperately needs it.
The generosity. And by the way, it's important to note that the cruise lines, Steve, are on their heels, really suffering too, because some ports are closed, right, but yet they're turning around and using their resources to do that. How about the airlines? United Airlines, Delta. My favorite is FedEx, where the mechanic came in and requested of his top bosses, can we use a plane to ferry meals? And now they're going back and forth 10,000 meals a day.
Right. No, you know, it's very heartening to see a lot of Americans are really hurting down there, clearly, and, you know, praying for them. But that's not enough. We have to also give tangible help. And these companies they're stepping up. I was very impressed with the telecom companies, AT&T and I think Verizon also, who are offering free data, unlimited talk to anybody who has their phones. So those kinds of tangible ways of helping are heartening, as I mentioned, and impressive. Business is not just about greed. It's not just about making money. It's about making life better, prosperity for everyone, including like this in an emergency situation.
Yeah, I believe T-Mobile is also helping. Juan, even companies right now that are being eviscerated by the government, Google, for example, being called on the carpet for all kinds of issues, they've given their employees money, $250,000. Their company matched it. You know, does this take away the demonization of corporate America?
Well, I mean, I think people like corporations. I mean, corporations provide us jobs, income. There's a lot of good to it. But, you know, to pick up on what others were saying, people oftentimes demonize or point to greed and excess. And we live in an era that's kind of gilded for those of us who are lucky enough to have some money in our pockets. But when you look at this situation, it really does open your eyes to the benefits of capitalism, because here you have people with resources willing to share. This is, to me, the best of our capitalistic system. It's at its apex. I mean, remember, President Trump had to go up against the shipping companies last week in terms of the Jones Act and say, anybody can come in who wants to do something here, not just limited to American ships. There was a little resistance, but ultimately President Trump and the shipping industry decided to help people. God bless them.
Yeah. Jerry, looking at all the industries, Coca-Cola giving $6 million. They've been attacked by just about everybody on the planet at a certain point in time. And to see that kind of generosity, what does that say about a company? And I don't want to hear the naysayers or the skeptics saying, oh, corporate America is just doing this for better PR. Who cares? The ends justify the means.
Well, the ends do justify the means, Liz, absolutely. And you see company after company doing this. I think, look, they know what's going on here. They know that people will respond to them. They know that what's really needed is help and help right now. Federal government really struggling here in Puerto Rico to get on the ground, to get things done. And you know how fast corporations can work and how much they can be, on the money when they need to. That's what we're getting right now. And that's what's so exciting about this. And you've got to say, look, whatever the motivation, it's working.
Rachel, it doesn't solve the debt crisis. I mean, they are swimming in debt in Puerto Rico. What happens after all of this? You know, you look at that lovely, lovely island and you figure out, how are they going to get back on their feet from the hurricane, let alone all of the debt that they're swimming in?
Right. Well, I mean, the debt crisis is an enormous problem. And part of the reason why the response has been so difficult for the government is because the economy in Puerto Rico, in many ways, didn't have the infrastructure and many of the resources it could have had if its economy had been strong and if it hadn't been struggling from this debt crisis. That said, there is something that Americans can do once Puerto Rico is on their feet and doing better. And that is, if they want to take a Caribbean vacation, and they are lovely, don't go to Cuba, go to Puerto Rico. That's America. That will make America great again. And you won't be giving money to an evil dictator dictatorship when you do that. You'll be making America great again, and it is a beautiful island with warm people, and I know they're hardworking, and they're going to get this back together again soon, and they're going to be ready to receive tourists, and I hope that Americans on the mainland really prioritize Puerto Rico and help them get back on their feet.
Rachel Campos Duffy, I have to tell you, you should moonlight for the PR department of Puerto Rico.
I should.